our writing lesson today. So today we are going to begin our innovation of our story, and we are going to start writing the opening. So can you please in your book write the date and the LO for me, please? And then it would be really helpful if you could get your plan from yesterday and make sure that you understand what is going to happen in your story. So date, LO, and make sure you have got your plan for me. Pause the video here. Okay, on to our story map. So we are going to continue to practice this every day. The video is still on the class page under Thursday, the 7th of January. So open that up, have a watch and see if you can say the words along with Mrs. Whiteman using any actions if you have thought of any. Pay particular attention to the first 2 paragraphs because that is what we are going to be innovating today. Okay, pause the video and practice your story map. Okay, on to our innovation then. So we are going to be innovating the first 2 paragraphs. Let's remind ourselves of the first 2 paragraphs of our model text. I'm going shopping in the village. Be good and no mischief, followed George's mum, standing at the foot of the stairs. George poked his head around the door. Mum continued, don't forget to give Grandma her medicine. George did not like Grandma. She had rotten brown teeth and a small puckered mouth. Mean and grumpy, selfish and wicked, she was always bossing him around. Okay, so now I remember what happened in our model text. I need to remind myself of what was happening in my plan, what I was going to be writing about. So I'm going to read that to make sure I'm really clear with what is going to happen in my story. So I said I was going to have some speech to introduce the main character. Mrs. Davis, did you remember to make Mrs. House her cup of tea? Asked Mr. Blake. So we were going to have Mrs. Davis, one of the teachers, needing to make the head teacher, Mrs. House, a cup of tea using her special tea bags. We were going to say that actually, unlike Grandma, Mrs. House was going to be a very nice character, and we were going to show this using a list. Mrs. House was the nicest head teacher you could ever meet. She always had a huge smile on her face, never gave out attentions, and let all of the children have extra playtime. Okay, now that I've reminded myself of what's going to happen in my story, I'm ready to start innovating. So I've got to remember, and I don't have you guys here to remind me today, I have to remember myself, I need to start every paragraph with an indent. Well done if you said that. Now I'm going to have some speech, and I'm going to have Mr. Blake asking Mrs. Davis if she had remembered Mrs. House's cup of tea. So let's think about what I'm going to write here. I think I'm going to say, Mrs. Davis, did you remember to make Mrs. House of tea? Asked Mr. Blake. Okay, now as always, I have made quite a few mistakes in my writing, and that's why it's really important we always reread every sentence and check it makes sense. Can you have a look at this sentence for me and see how many mistakes you can spot? Pause the video for me here. Hopefully you found lots of my mistakes. Let's see how many we can spot together. Now, of course, I said that I was going to include speech in my story. If I'm including speech, I've got to have inverted commas, don't I? Can you pause the video and see where those inverted commas are going to go? Well done. If you said the inverted commas were going to go at the beginning. Mrs. Davis, did you remember to make Mrs. House a cup of tea? And after tea. This is what Mr. Blake says. So there's some of our mistakes. What other mistakes can we spot? Davis. Now this needs a capital letter. Can you remember why it needs a capital letter? Because it's a name, so it is a proper noun. Well done if you remembered what a proper noun was. Mrs. Davis, did you remember to make Mrs. House a cup of tea? Oh, does that make sense? I'm going to have to do some editing here. Mrs. Davis, did you remember to make Mrs. House a cup of tea? Davis, did you remember to make Mrs. House her cup of tea? That makes more sense, doesn't it? Now I can see here that I've got a spelling mistake in remember. Can you spot that missing letter? Well done if you spotted there should be an E before the R. And there's still a mistake in here. Well done if you realise that actually this shouldn't be an exclamation mark. Did you remember to make Mrs. House her cup of tea? That's a question, so I need a question mark. Mrs. Davis, did you remember to make Mrs. House her cup of tea? Asked Mr. Blake. Now here I'm going to add in some extra detail. So I'm going to put a comma and I'm going to use our speech verb action to show what Mr. Blake might be doing as he's talking to Mrs. Davis. Now I want to give the impression that they are in a school. So what might Mr. Blake be doing if they're in a school? See if you can think of some ideas for me. I think that maybe Mr. Blake might be doing the photocopying. So I could say, Mrs. Davis, did you remember to make Mrs. House her cup of tea? Asked Mr. Blake. Picking up his photocopying from the machine. Okay, that's our first sentence. I'm going to read it one more time just to make sure I haven't made any mistakes. Mrs. Davis, did you remember to make Mrs. House her cup of tea? Asked Mr. Blake, picking up his photocopying from the machine. Okay, now I need to have Mrs. Davis's reaction when she realises that she has forgotten to make Mrs. House's cup of tea. I think I might say, Mrs. Davis immediately dropped her book and walked to the staff room. Why would she go to the staff room? What might she be wanting to do in there? Maybe to make the cup of tea. Mrs. Davis immediately dropped her book and walked to the staff room. I think here I might actually put a dash so I can put some extra information in. Mrs. Davis immediately dropped her book and walked to the staff room. She couldn't believe she had forgotten. Okay, now there is a missing apostrophe in this sentence. Can you spot where that apostrophe needs to go? Well done if you said it needs to go in couldn't between the N and the T because it's a contraction of could not. Mrs. Davis immediately dropped her book and walked to the staff room. She couldn't believe she had forgotten. Now that's a good sentence, but I'm just wondering about this word walked. If she walked to the staff room, that implies to me that actually she was quite relaxed, she wasn't really in a rush. Whereas I think that Mrs. Davis might have been in a real rush to go and make this cup of tea. Can we think of a better word choice for here? Maybe a synonym of walked? Mrs. Davis immediately dropped her book and I'm thinking perhaps bolted. Bolted implies that she went there really quickly because she was in a rush and bolted to the staff room. She couldn't believe she had forgotten. Okay, I think that's my first paragraph done because I've set the scene, I've used my speech to introduce what is happening, and I've shown how panicked Mrs. Davis is. Now you could also add in some more speech at the end if you would like to as well. Now we're still on my opening, but I can see in my second paragraph we give a bit of description about this head teacher, Mrs. House, and we had said that actually Mrs. House was going to be a lovely head teacher. So I'm going to start my second paragraph, remembering my indent with Mrs. House was the nicest head teacher. The nicest head teacher, what did I put in my plan? You could ever meet. Oh, I like that idea, so I'm going to magnify that actually. Mrs. House was the nicest head teacher you could ever meet. Now I'm going to write a list, but what punctuation do I need first? Well done if you said that I need a colon. Now I need to remember my ideas for why she might be the nicest head teacher you could ever meet. Now again, I'm going to keep my ideas from my plan. So she always had a huge smile on her face, comma, what else might I say about her? Never gave out attentions and gave the children extra playtime. Okay, so let's have another look at that sentence. Remember, we always need to reread it to check it makes sense. Mrs. House was the nicest head teacher you could ever meet, colon. She always had a huge smile on her face, never gave out attentions, and gave the children extra playtime. Okay, I think I'm going to add in this lovely two-pair sentence now to give some extra information about her. But of course, I'm not going to use the adjectives mean and grumpy, selfish and wicked, because this head teacher was very nice. I think I might say kind and polite. What else could I use to describe the head teacher? Can you think of two adjectives that would show someone was very kind? That might describe a nice person? Kind and polite, generous and caring, perhaps. Kind and polite, comma, generous and caring, comma. What might she always be doing? Perhaps I could say she was always helping the children with their learning. Have I got the right there here? Ah, yes, because I'm talking about the people, aren't I? Mrs. House was the nicest head teacher you could ever meet. She always had a huge smile on her face, never gave out detentions, and gave the children extra playtime. Kind and polite, generous and caring, she was always helping the children with their learning. Okay, well, let's have a look then, because remember, my opening had to introduce our main character, and it was going to introduce a character that the lost item belonged to as well. So we're going to reread our first two paragraphs and just check that they make sense. The characters like they should have done. Mrs. Davis, did you remember to make Mrs. House her cup of tea? Asked Mr. Blake, picking up his photocopying from the machine. Mrs. Davis immediately dropped her book and bolted to the staff room. She couldn't believe she had forgotten. Mrs. House was the nicest head teacher you could ever meet. She always had a huge smile on her face, never gave out detentions, and gave the children extra playtime. Kind and polite, generous and caring, she was always helping the children with their learning. Ah, fantastic, that makes sense to me. And I've introduced our main character, Mrs. Davis. I've introduced the idea that something's going to go wrong with this cup of tea. And I have described our other character as well, who here is Mrs. House, the head teacher. And I've described her as being very kind and generous. Okay, now it is your turn. So having a look at your plan, using our model text and our story map to help you, can you have a go at writing your opening for me? So that's these first two paragraphs. Try to remember to include some speech in there with your inverted commas, preferably with the verb action as well if you want to really challenge yourself. Make sure you've got a colon to introduce a list, and make sure you have got those two pair sentences as well. Remember, you don't have to follow our model exactly. If you've got your own ideas to include as well, that is brilliant. But I would like to see that speech, the colon to introduce a list, and those two pair sentences. Please send me in your paragraphs when they are done so I can have a look at them ready for our build-up tomorrow.